There is a kind of man who achieves everything he desires and another kind who destroys everything he touches. The difference between them is not talent, it is not luck, it is not even effort. The difference is invisible. It moves like water through stone. It cannot be measured by willpower, yet it determines whether a man will rise or collapse under the weight of his own ambition. The Taoist sages of ancient China understood this difference with terrifying clarity. They called it Wu Wei, the art of effortless action, and they guarded it as the supreme law of nature itself. Those who mastered it became unstoppable without ever appearing to try. Those who violated it were crushed by the very force of their own striving. This is the paradox that separates men who flow through life from men who drown in it. And until you understand it, every victory you chase will turn to ash in your hands. In a city that never sleeps, there lives a man named Daniel. He is 34 years old. He has spent the last decade building what the world calls success. He wakes at 5 in the morning. He responds to emails before the sun rises. He schedules his days in 15-minute blocks, and he measures his worth by how exhausted he feels when he finally collapses into bed. Daniel believes in effort. He believes that the world rewards those who want it most, those who push hardest, those who sacrifice everything for their goals. He has read every book on productivity. He has attended seminars on peak performance. He has optimized his sleep, his nutrition, his morning routine, and yet something is breaking inside him. The harder he pushes, the more the world seems to resist him. Projects that should take weeks drag on for months. Relationships that should bring him peace bring only tension. Every achievement feels hollow before he even celebrates it, because his mind is already racing toward the next milestone. Daniel is caught in a trap that has no name in the modern world, but the ancient sages would recognize it immediately. He is a man at war with the river of life itself. He grips the water with clenched fists, believing that force is the answer to every obstacle. And the water slips through his fingers while he grows more desperate, more depleted, more convinced that he simply needs to try harder. This is the disease of the modern achiever. It looks like ambition from the outside. It feels like drowning from within. In ancient China, there was a fisherman who lived along the banks of a great river. Every day, the other fishermen would row furiously against the current, exhausting themselves before the sun reached its peak, returning home with empty nets and aching backs. But this fisherman was different. He would sit in his small boat and watch the water for hours. He studied the patterns of the current, the behavior of the fish, the movement of the seasons. When he finally cast his net, he did so at the exact moment when the river itself seemed to deliver the fish into his hands. He caught more than any other fisherman while appearing to do almost nothing at all. The other fishermen hated him. They called him lazy. They called him lucky. They refused to believe that his success came from understanding rather than effort. But the truth was simple. He had learned to work with the river instead of against it. He had discovered the secret that the Taoist masters would later codify into the highest principle of human action. Shan, the hermit sage of Ink Mountain, understood this secret in his bones. He watched from his place among the clouds as countless men climbed towards success by the same exhausting methods. They believed that the universe was an enemy to be conquered. They believed that achievement required domination, that progress demanded struggle, that the only path to greatness was paved with relentless force. And Shan watched them burn out, break down, and destroy themselves with the very intensity that was supposed to save them. The sage did not judge these men. He simply observed that they had misunderstood the fundamental nature of reality. They were trying to force flowers to bloom by pulling on the petals. They were trying to fill a cup by squeezing water in their fists. They were fighting against the very grain of existence, and existence was winning. Wu Wei is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in all of Eastern philosophy. The Western mind hears effortless action and imagines passivity. It pictures a man sitting motionless while the world passes him by, doing nothing and expecting everything to fall into his lap. This interpretation could not be more wrong. Wu Wei is not the absence of action. It is the presence of alignment. It is action that flows from such deep understanding of natural patterns that it appears effortless to observers while achieving results that forced effort could never produce. Consider the master calligrapher who has practiced for 40 years. When he lifts his brush, his movements appear simple, almost casual. The ink flows onto the paper as if guided by invisible hands. A student watching might think that calligraphy is easy, that anyone could produce such beauty with a few quick strokes. But the master's ease is not the absence of effort, it is the transcendence of effort. 40 years of practice have been absorbed into his body until the right action emerges spontaneously, without deliberation, without struggle, without the friction of a divided mind. This is Wu Wei. It is not doing nothing. It is doing everything that matters while doing nothing that interferes. Lao Tzu, the legendary founder of Taoism, wrote that the highest good is like water. Water benefits all things without competing with them. It flows to the lowest places that men disdain, and in doing so it comes closest to the Tao itself. This is not a poetic metaphor. It is a precise instruction for human action. Water does not force its way through obstacles. When it meets a rock, it does not smash against it endlessly, wearing itself out in futile collision. It simply flows around the rock, finding the path of least resistance while still moving inexorably toward its destination. And over time, water shapes mountains. The Mississippi River did not carve its path through the continent by fighting against the land. It found the lowest ground and followed it, allowing gravity and patience to do the work that force could never accomplish. The Grand Canyon was not created by a single catastrophic explosion. It was carved by water moving ceaselessly, effortlessly in alignment with natural law for millions of years. Shan would teach that modern man has forgotten how to be like water. He has been taught that success requires the qualities of fire, aggression, consumption, violent transformation of everything it touches. Fire is impressive. Fire commands attention. Fire creates immediate, visible change. But fire also burns itself out. It requires constant fuel. It destroys as much as it transforms. And when the fuel runs out, fire dies, leaving only ash and the memory of what it consumed. Water never dies. It transforms endlessly, from river to cloud to rain to river again. It shapes the hardest stone without exhausting itself. It yields to every obstacle while ultimately overcoming everything. This is the nature of Wu Wei. It is the power of yielding, the strength of flexibility, the victory of alignment over opposition. The internal war begins the moment you understand this principle intellectually but cannot live it. This is where Daniel finds himself now, having read about Wu Wei in some book, having nodded along to the wisdom of the ancient sages, and having returned to his frantic schedule the very next morning. Because knowing is not being, understanding a concept is not embodying it, and the gap between intellectual knowledge and lived wisdom is where most men spend their entire lives, trapped in the torture of seeing the answer clearly while being unable to reach it. The obstacle is not external. The obstacle is the structure of the modern mind itself. We have been conditioned from birth to believe that more effort produces more results. This conditioning runs so deep that it feels like biological truth. When we want something, our first instinct is to pursue it more aggressively. When we fail, our first interpretation is that we did not try hard enough. When we see someone succeeding with apparent ease, our first assumption is that they are hiding their struggle or blessed with advantages we lack. We cannot imagine that the ease itself might be the source of their success. Psychology reveals why this conditioning is so difficult to overcome. The human brain has evolved to respond to immediate threats with immediate action. When our ancestors faced a predator, survival depended on explosive effort, fight or flight, maximum exertion in the present moment. This response pattern served us well in an environment of acute physical dangers. But the modern world does not threaten us with predators. It threatens us with chronic stress, with career uncertainty, with social comparison, with the endless anxiety of never being enough. And our ancient brain does not know the difference. It responds to an unanswered email with the same biochemical cascade that once responded to a charging lion. It treats every opportunity as a life or death struggle. It cannot comprehend that less effort might produce better results, because in the ancestral environment, less effort usually meant death. This is the biological prison that Wu Wei asks you to escape. Your nervous system will resist. Your conditioning will scream that you are making a fatal mistake. Every instinct you have will tell you to push harder, try more, force the outcome into existence. And you must learn to act against these instincts, not through more force, but through the patient cultivation of a different relationship with action itself. The Confucian scholars who lived alongside the Taoist masters understood something essential about this cultivation. They knew that transformation does not happen through single moments of insight. It happens through sustained practice that reshapes the very structure of character. They called this process self-cultivation, and they approached it with the same dedication that a farmer approaches the cultivation of his fields. A farmer does not make crops grow through force of will. He cannot stand in his field and demand that the seeds produce fruit. His role is to create the conditions for growth, to prepare the soil, to plant at the right time, to water and weed and protect. The growth itself happens according to laws that transcend his individual effort. His job is alignment, not domination. The same principle applies to the cultivation of Wu Wei. You cannot force yourself into effortless action. The very attempt to force it violates its essential nature. But you can create the conditions in which it emerges naturally. You can prepare the soil of your mind. You can remove the weeds of frantic thought. You can water the seeds of awareness until alignment becomes your default state. Shan would say that the first condition for Wu Wei is the death of desperate wanting, not the end of desire itself, but the end of the clutching, grasping, fearful wanting that characterizes most human striving. There is a difference between a man who wants success and a man who is desperate for success. The wanting man sees his goal clearly and moves toward it with focused action. The desperate man sees his goal through a fog of fear, and his movements are jerky, reactive, driven by anxiety rather than clarity. The desperate man works harder and accomplishes less. He pushes people away while trying to draw them closer. He sabotages his own progress through the very intensity of his need. You can see this pattern everywhere in modern life. The entrepreneur who is desperate for funding cannot relax in investor meetings, and his tension communicates that something is wrong with his company. The single person who is desperate for a relationship projects neediness that repels potential partners. The employee who is desperate for promotion becomes so anxious to please that he loses the confidence and creativity that would actually earn the promotion. Desperation is the enemy of Wu Wei because desperation creates friction. It introduces resistance into every action. It makes you fight against the natural flow of circumstances rather than working with it. The ancient masters developed specific practices for releasing desperate wanting. Meditation was one such practice, not as a relaxation technique, but as a method for observing the mind's patterns without being controlled by them. When you sit in stillness and watch your thoughts, you begin to see how much of your mental activity is driven by fear. You see the endless planning and scheming, the rehearsal of conversations that may never happen, the replaying of past mistakes, the projection of future disasters. And in seeing this pattern clearly, you create space between the stimulus and your response. You develop the capacity to choose action rather than react compulsively. You begin to discover a place within yourself that is not desperate, that is not afraid, that can observe circumstances without being swept away by them. This is the foundation of Wu Wei. But meditation alone is not enough. The Taoist tradition also emphasized the cultivation of Ti, often translated as virtue or power, but meaning something closer to the authentic expression of your nature. A tree does not struggle to be a tree. It simply grows according to its nature, extending roots and branches in the directions that suit its particular form. A tiger does not struggle to be fierce. Fierceness emerges naturally from its being. In the same way, a human who has discovered their Ti acts from a place of natural power rather than artificial effort. Their actions align with their nature, and this alignment produces results that forced effort could never achieve. Shan understood that most men never discover their Te because they are too busy trying to be something they are not. They spend their lives in imitation, copying the paths of successful people without asking whether those paths align with their own nature. They force themselves into careers and relationships and lifestyles that violate their essential being. And then they wonder why they feel exhausted despite all their effort. They are like a river trying to flow uphill, expending enormous energy to work against their own gravity. The discovery of your Te is not a mystical revelation. It is a practical process of paying attention to what brings you alive, what activities absorb your focus without depleting your energy, what contributions feel meaningful rather than merely profitable. It requires the courage to disappoint others by refusing to be what they want you to be. It requires the wisdom to recognize that alignment with your nature is not selfishness, but the highest form of service, because only authentic expression produces authentic value. There is a story from ancient China about a butcher named Ding, who was brought before the king to demonstrate his craft. The king watched in amazement as Ding cut through an entire ox with movements that seemed more like dance than butchery. His knife never dulled, his cuts were precise without apparent effort. When he finished, the king asked him to explain his secret. Ding replied that when he first began cutting oxen, all he could see was the ox. After 3 years of practice, he no longer saw the ox. He saw the spaces between the joints, the natural pathways where a knife could move without meeting resistance. He did not cut through the ox. He guided his knife through the places where there was nothing to cut. This is the essence of practical Wu Wei. It is not the absence of skill, but the complete absorption of skill into being. It is not the avoidance of action, but the discovery of action that meets no resistance, because it follows the natural grain of reality. Modern neuroscience confirms what the ancient butcher discovered through practice. When we learn a new skill, our brain creates new neural pathways. These pathways require conscious attention and effort to activate. But as we practice, the pathways become stronger and more automatic. Eventually, the skill moves from conscious processing to automatic execution. This is why a master musician can play complex pieces while carrying on a conversation. Why a professional athlete can make split-second decisions that would overwhelm a beginner's conscious mind. The master has not eliminated effort. They have internalized effort so completely that it no longer feels like effort. The challenge for most people is that they never reach this stage. They practice inconsistently. They switch between methods before any method has time to become automatic. They are so impatient for results that they never allow the deep neural integration that produces Wu Wei. They are like a man who digs 100 shallow holes looking for water, when a single deep well would have served him better. Consistency in practice is where the Taoist and Confucian traditions converge. The Taoists understood that nature operates through patient, sustained processes. A river does not carve a canyon through intermittent effort. It flows constantly, day after day, century after century, until the stone yields. The Confucians understood that character is built through daily ritual, through the repeated performance of right action until right action becomes second nature. Together, these traditions teach that transformation requires showing up every day, not with desperate intensity, but with patient persistence. This is perhaps the hardest lesson for the modern mind. We want immediate results. We want to feel the progress with every session. We want transformation to be dramatic and visible and shareable on social media. But real transformation is invisible. It happens in the microscopic rewiring of neural pathways. It happens in the gradual shifting of default responses. It happens so slowly that you cannot perceive it day to day and only become aware of it when you look back over months or years and realize that you are no longer the person you were. Shan would teach that the obsession with visible progress is itself a form of desperate wanting. When you need to see results, you introduce friction into the process. You interrupt the natural unfolding with constant measurement. You are like a gardener who digs up his seeds every day to check whether they are growing, destroying the very growth he is trying to observe. The master practitioner learns to trust the process without demanding evidence. They learn to find satisfaction in the practice itself rather than the outcomes it produces. This is not resignation. It is the recognition that practice done for the love of practice is more effective than practice done for the desperation of results. The practitioner who loves their practice will practice more consistently, more deeply, more joyfully. And consistent, deep, joyful practice produces the very results that desperate practice chases but never catches. The pre-decision is another tool that the ancient masters understood intuitively. Before the battle begins, before the temptation arises, before the obstacle appears, the wise person has already decided how they will respond. The Taoist sage did not wait until he was angry to decide how to handle anger. He had already cultivated equanimity so deeply that anger did not arise in the form that required handling. The Confucian gentleman did not wait until he faced a moral dilemma to decide his values. He had already practiced virtue so thoroughly that right action emerged spontaneously. In practical terms, this means deciding in advance how you will handle the situations that typically derail you. If you know that you tend to abandon your meditation practice when you travel, you decide before you travel exactly how and when you will meditate. If you know that you tend to fall into desperate striving when a project falls behind schedule, you decide before any project begins how you will respond to delays. The pre-decision removes the need for willpower in the moment of challenge. It removes the opportunity for negotiation with your weaker impulses. It creates a structure that guides your behavior automatically, freeing your attention for more important matters. The samurai of Japan, who were deeply influenced by both Buddhist and Confucian philosophy, formalized this principle in their concept of dying before you go into battle. Before the battle begins, the samurai has already accepted death. He has already released attachment to survival. This acceptance does not make him passive or fatalistic. It makes him free. He can act with full commitment because he is not protecting anything. He can respond to the flow of combat without the friction of fear. His actions emerge from the moment rather than from desperate calculation. This is the ultimate expression of Wu Wei in crisis. It is not the absence of action, but the presence of absolute commitment, without attachment to outcome. You might wonder how this ancient wisdom applies to the mundane challenges of modern life. You are not a samurai facing death in battle. You are Daniel, facing deadlines and meetings and the slow grind of building a career. But the principle is identical. The friction that exhausts you is not the work itself. It is your relationship to the work. It is the desperate wanting, the constant measuring, the fear of failure, the comparison to others, the need to prove yourself. These mental patterns double or triple the energy required for any task. They introduce resistance where none needs to exist. Consider what happens when you work on something you love, when you are so absorbed in the activity that time disappears and effort feels like play. This is not a rare mystical state. It is the natural result of alignment between your activity and your nature, combined with the absence of desperate wanting. The task may be objectively difficult, but subjectively it feels effortless because your whole being is moving in the same direction. There is no internal friction, no part of you resisting while another part pushes forward. This is Wu Wei in daily life. Shan would say that the transformation you seek is not adding something to yourself. It is removing what interferes with your natural power. You were born with the capacity for Wu Wei. Every child demonstrates it naturally, becoming so absorbed in play that they forget to eat, learning new skills with astonishing speed because they have not yet developed the desperate wanting that creates friction. The process of becoming an adult in modern society has layered interference upon interference over this natural capacity. You have been taught to strain, to struggle, to prove yourself through visible effort. You have been conditioned to believe that ease is laziness and that suffering is the price of success. Unlearning these patterns is the work of a lifetime, but every moment of practice, every experience of flow, every time you catch yourself clutching and choose to release, you are removing interference and returning to your original nature. The man who masters Wu Wei does not look different from the outside. He still works. He still faces challenges. He still pursues meaningful goals. but his relationship to all of it has shifted. He acts without the burden of desperate wanting. He responds to circumstances without the friction of resistance. He achieves without depleting himself because his actions flow from alignment rather than force. He becomes like the fisherman on the river, catching more than everyone else while appearing to do less. He becomes like water, yielding to every obstacle while ultimately shaping mountains. He becomes, in the words of Lao Tzu, one who does nothing yet leaves nothing undone. Daniel is beginning to understand. Not intellectually, he understood intellectually years ago. He is beginning to feel it in his body, to notice the moments when he clutches and to practice releasing. He is beginning to trust the process without demanding evidence. He is beginning to discover that his exhaustion was never caused by the amount of work he did, but by the friction of how he did it. The transformation will take time. The nervous system does not rewire overnight. The conditioning of decades does not dissolve in a single insight. But something has shifted that cannot be unshifted. He has seen through the illusion that force is the answer to every obstacle. He has glimpsed the possibility of a different relationship with action itself. This is the path that Shan offers from his place on Ink Mountain. Not a technique to be applied, but a way of being to be cultivated. Not a promise of easy success, but an invitation to discover that true success was never about ease or difficulty. It was about alignment. The world will continue to reward the obsessed and destroy the desperate. These are not opposites, but the same pattern at different intensities. The obsessed man who maintains alignment with his nature will achieve what the desperate man chases in vain. The desperate man who gains everything he seeks will find only emptiness because the seeking itself was the problem. Wu Wei is the middle way between passivity and desperation. It is the art of moving with the current of life while still choosing your destination. It is the secret that the Taoist sages never broke because they understood that breaking it meant breaking themselves. The river does not fight its way to the sea. It simply flows, following the lowest ground, yielding to every obstacle. Never in a hurry because it knows that arrival is certain. And in its patient flowing, it carves canyons and moves mountains and sustains all life along its banks. You are the river. Your destination is already determined by your nature. The only question is whether you will fight your way there, exhausting yourself against every rock and bend, or whether you will flow, trusting the current, releasing the desperate grip, and arriving whole at the place you were always meant to reach. If something in these words has stirred recognition in you, if you sense that there is a different way to move through life than the one you have been taught, then perhaps you are ready to walk further along this path. Subscribe to Ink and Mountain for more teachings from the ancient wisdom of China, from the mountain where Shan sits in patient silence, watching the clouds pass and the river flow, holding the truth that effort is not the enemy but friction is, and that the highest achievement is the achievement that looks like no achievement at all.